Olá, sejam todos muito bem-vindos.
Hi, welcome to the third episode of the Brazilian Leather webinar series. Our topic today is the automotive industry and sustainability. I'm Rogério Cunha from the Commercial Intelligence Department of the Center for the Brazilian Tanning Industry, CICB. I'll be here with you moderating this important debate for the leather industry. The Brazilian Leather webinar series is a series of 3 online seminars organized by CICB with the support of National Wildlife Federation, NWF, a civil society organization that works hand in hand with the tanning industry to address market issues and to establish public policies to eliminate losses in rainforests throughout the world. Today, this is the final episode that has helped us provide important information for the leather industry. Today, we'll be focusing on the auto industry. Today, about 37% of leather exports are for the upholstery use and accessories for vehicles. This is the most important share in our foreign markets. 2 guests today, Stephen Jeske of GST Auto Leather, a global supplier of leather components for the automotive industry, and Kim Sena, Sustainability Manager of JBS Couros. Stephen will be speaking first. He'll be speaking in English. It will be interpreted into Portuguese. All you have to do is choose your audio selection at the bottom, interpretation. And then Kim will be speaking in Portuguese. Then we'll be having a Q&A session. Your microphones will be off. You can submit your questions through the Q&A button. If your question is not answered during the webinar, please send them to contato@cscb.org.br. Before I turn over to Stephen, I would like to acknowledge the CICB members that are here today. Also, the Sustainability Certification Program, CICB, and the members of the Brazilian Leather Program, an initiative led by CICB and Apex Brazil to promote leather exports. Having said that, let me introduce our first speaker, Stephen. He is in charge of the marketing activities of GST Auto Leather, a leading company to supply leather components to the automotive industry. Their customers include Audi, GM, Honda, Ford, Toyota, Porsche, Mercedes-Benz, and BMW. Stephen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Rogério. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Even though we have no idea who our next president will be, we have an extraordinarily beautiful day here in Michigan. It will be 70 degrees and sunny for the next 3 days, which this time of year in Michigan, we could very easily have 10 centimeters of snow. So a beautiful day here. So again, Rogério, thank you very much. And on behalf of GST, I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the CICB Auto Webinar Series. Today, I plan to share a macro overview of the global automotive vehicle market forecast, then pivot to the surface material content, provide a glimpse of the Nielsen consumer research study we just recently completed in China and the US. I will show a much deeper dive presentation in December with an ILM webinar, so hopefully you can join that as well. And then I'm going to close with an overview of our sustainability projects here at GST, and then our Leather United campaign. So as I mentioned, the first slide that I'll share with you is the macro overview of the global vehicle build per IHS, which is where we get most of our forecast information. So first of all, you can see that we are not going to reach our pre-COVID vehicle production rate of 2019, which was at 90 million vehicles we will not get there until roughly 2024. So quite a significant impact here from the COVID crisis. Originally, we were looking at, from a global standpoint, to get towards 100 million vehicles in the second half of this decade, but we can safely say now it will probably not be until we get towards 2030. Secondly, I'd like you to take a look at the segments that I've highlighted here below. I'm going to give you a few different breakdowns here on the build itself, but first of all are the vehicle segments. So the ones I'd like you to focus in on, and again, you can see them on the screen, are the D, E, full frame, and luxury. These are the segment of vehicles where leather is most prominent and are very, very important to this industry. So luckily, we see that these segments are going to continue to grow. Luxury, obviously, very, very important, roughly 11 million vehicles globally. And basically, that's a segment that we have to dominate. Secondly, I want you to focus in on the C segment. The C segment has always been really the leading segment in the industry, and this is a combination of sedan and SUVs. And it's one that does utilize quite a bit of leather, but in recent years, probably the last 5 or 6 years, this is the one that has been cannibalized the most for the substitution of synthetic materials over our beautiful leather materials. And this is one that we will be focusing on as we go forward, but clearly we've got to dominate the DE, full frame, and luxury. The A segment, the smaller vehicles, as you can see down here in the bottom, remains flat and actually decreases a little bit over time as we head into 26, which is really good news for us in the leather market, because frankly, that is a segment where the usage is very small, and frankly, probably the right materials for those are either fabric or synthetic. All right, the next page is I want to share with you the overview of propulsion. Now, this is an important page for us, folks, because frankly, we are in the middle of a revolution, and it's truly a once-in-a-100-year revolution. And history over time is going to look back on this particular time frame in the industry, and they will see this as being a very, very significant moment here during these, say, 20 years. Because what you can see is happening here is that the internal combustion engine, which is the ICE, over time here from 20 to 25 continues to decrease, and in favor of the replacement, you see the hybrids and the electrics trending upward. The autonomous stays fairly flat during this time frame, less than 1%. And again, there's many different levels of autonomous, different mechanisms, but in terms of a full autonomous vehicle that everybody has heard about, most likely that's going to be out somewhere outside of 2040, 2050. But what's affecting our industry that's important to recognize is the fact that most of the OEMs in the world have made significant investments in both the EV market as well as the autonomous. And because of that, they basically have had to take a look at their internal costs. And one of the easy answers for them internally from a cost standpoint is to make replacements or substitutions from authentic leather to synthetics. And this is something that we as an industry in the automotive world have been working very hard to make sure and promote to the customers that this is not the right way to go, because consumers do aspire to have leather, and we're going to continue to do that. But it's a natural evolution of what's happening inside these companies because of the cost pressure that is on them, because the amount of investments they're putting forth towards EV and autonomous is significant. And the final point that I'll make here in this page is the majority of the growth, at least in the next 20 years, will be in China and Europe. And China will be the leader probably from now until well past 2050. The investment that country has made and the commitment they've made to EVs is significant. And you're going to see on one of the following pages the number of companies, domestic companies that have now entered into the automotive market. But their plan is to have basically by 2035, they'd like to be at a proportion of 40% electric vehicles from their entire fleet, which is significant, very aggressive, but if it can be done, it can be done in China. All right, so that next slide I wanted to share is by OEM, and this is where I will talk about that domestic situation in China. But you can see here, basically down below, it's a little bit of a impacted graph lines here. But basically, as you can see, we have got basically 4 levels here from a volume standpoint. So level 1, which are the leaders, is the VAG, Toyota, and Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi. Volkswagen, of course, is Volkswagen, Porsche, and Audi. These are the leaders, upwards of 10 million vehicles per year for all 3 of these. The next level, Hyundai, Kia, and General Motors. Hyundai, Kia, over the last 10, 15 years, has really elevated into this position, have gotten very global over the years and continued to grow. They've added a new luxury brand, Genesis, which is great news for us in the leather market, and a very progressive company, as you all know. Level 3 would be Ford, PSA, and FCA. Interesting here, as you all know, PSA and FCA will be merging into a new company called Stellantis. When they do come together, the combined volumes of PSA and FCA will put it up in that level 2 range. So a very, very important customer, and at least for GST, one that we're lucky enough to be a big part of. And then finally, level 4, and 2 companies that are super important in the industry, super important for leather, BMW and Daimler. Roughly 3 million vehicles per year, certainly the dominant players in the luxury market from a volume standpoint, and certainly important for us in the leather business. Then the other segment up on top. So if you look at this blue line up here, obviously the growth here is primarily because of the China volume, but I highlight here that as we are in this particular horizon, 74 domestic China OEMs. Many of those are NEV companies, new energy vehicle, that are banking on the commitment from the government that electric vehicles will become the largest share in that country. Whether these survive or not, but it's a significant commitment from these companies in China. And over time, we're going to see more and more of the volume shift from the international OEMs to the domestic OEMs. But again, it's going to be a slow move, but certainly they are gearing up to be the prominent players well into this century. And then the final page I have here regarding the segments is to look at it by region. And again, no surprise that the leading region as we move forward through the decade will be China. All of the regions obviously take a very steady 20% drop roughly in 2020 because of the COVID situation. But China will be a growth area. We all know that. But the mature markets can get back to their pre-COVID level, and you can see they'll kind of maintain their basic rate. North America does grow a little bit. Europe seems to flatten out. Korea, Japan flattens out. You can see a little bit of growth here with South America, to some degree also for the Middle East and Africa and Southeast Asia. They are still showing a growth here throughout this particular decade, and the majority of that is basically with a projection they have for India. So from my standpoint, I still question whether it's going to happen. They've been projecting it now for 5 to 10 years, but the infrastructure is going to have to significantly improve for them to get to the kind of volume levels they talk about in India. And I'm sure if anybody who's been there realizes the road system has a long way to go. But basically, this is a view by region, and we are a global player. And frankly, to be a strong player in the automotive industry because of the fact that most of the major OEMs do have facilities around the world, you've got to be able to service them in a very close proximity. All right, so then as I mentioned, I'm going to pivot to the surface material market. Now this is it's the busy page, and we've basically broken out by revenue and by area, in this case square feet. So I wanted to share with you, and I'll give you some thoughts as you study this. Again, it's a lot of information, and we may actually share this in my discussions with Bianca and Jessica. But basically, from a revenue standpoint, we are projecting this year for 2021, and this again is work we do internally with our global sales team, that the market that we are servicing, which is the seating and some of the interior components, will be roughly $5.5 billion US. Obviously taking a hit because of COVID. We do believe that it is roughly, there's another 10% on top of that, give or take, that is the steering wheel market and some of the other accessories. So probably directionally for a number to really be, even though we don't necessarily study that part of the market, it's safe to say that north of $6 billion US makes up the surface material market. And you can see how it splits here by fabric, by synthetic, which we all know that as PVC, PU, TPO, etc. Suede, this is artificial suede, and leather. And then you can see we've also broken it out by vehicle segment, entry, mid, and premium. And that's obviously important for us because, as we talked earlier, the premium segment is one that we have to dominate in. The mid segment is the one that's really up for grabs with all of the materials, and on the entry side, it's predominantly fabric and synthetic. And then on the square footage side, the same scenario, that basically we're saying now 4 billion square feet, gross square feet with us in the automotive industry globally, but we could probably raise that the ultimate market, including the steering wheel and accessories, would be north of 4.5 billion going forward. And this is 21, a snapshot of 2021. But for us as a company, this now has taken a lot of our attention because no longer are we just competing against other leather suppliers who are wonderful suppliers in our space, but we now have to keep a very close eye on the fabric world, the synthetic world, and the suede world, because frankly, that is where some of our market share has been cannibalized, and we've got to earn that back. And then finally, on the bottom, we have taken a shot here to share with you what the vehicle content is per country. And this would be anywhere from 5 square feet per vehicle up to 75 square feet per vehicle. But it's any vehicle that has some content of leather. So in North America, on average, it's roughly 32% of the vehicles have some leather content. Europe, 18%. China, 30%, which has come down dramatically in the last 10 years. Japan, 5%. South America, 4%. And India, 2%. So again, a lot of information here. Hopefully you've had a chance to absorb a little of it looking at it. But now in our business, in the past, we've always focused on the leather market being the one we had to really track and be on top of. But it has shifted now because of this move to synthetics, that we better understand what the entire real estate pie is. All right, I mentioned a snapshot here of what we did with Nielsen. So Nielsen, a very reputable research firm, recently completed a study for us this summer in China and the US. I'm going to just share with you a few pages here. As I mentioned to you, the detailed study will be shown in December, but these are some important pages that I wanted to share with you today. First of all, it was regarding the surface material preference of the consumers, and in this particular page, it was in China, 1,827 participants. You can see there, that'll be consistent throughout, that 69% of these individuals who were part of the study prefer leather, which is very, very significant. And the other segments that they were evaluating were joint, 18%, just to let you know, that's fabric and synthetic, 8% synthetic, 5% fabric. So in terms of preference, that is a major number, and one that we're going to continue to share with our OEM customers for them to understand what the consumers are saying, both in China and the US. I will say to you, the US was slightly lower, but roughly around 53%, so still a significant number. Secondly, the attributes that the people acknowledged regarding their preference for leather, nothing really new to us here in the leather world. Soft and comfortable, 71%, better texture, more luxurious, 70%, easy to clean and maintenance. So this prevailed through the entire study, the focus on comfort and luxury, and it really is the mainstay of leather. It's why it's been so important to consumers for decades, and why they aspire to have the material in many different markets. Now, the next question that was this part of the survey, which was important that I wanted to share with you today, was to the participants that when they purchase their next car, to give an assessment of would they select leather to be the material for that next vehicle purchase. And you can see how it was broken out by their answers, either very likely, likely, neutral, not likely, or not likely at all. Significantly, you can see the 4 different quadrants here. And there were participants in the study either owned leather vehicles today, joint material, I mentioned that was synthetic and fabric, or the vehicles had fabric in it, or it had synthetic. What I want to highlight here, because it's obviously with somebody who owns a leather vehicle today, that the percentage of them that would want leather in their next vehicle, 92%, either very likely or likely, is intuitive. But it's interesting that the synthetic owners, 90% of the synthetic owners said that either it was very likely or likely they would have leather in their next vehicle purchase. Again, a significant number in line with their preference for leather that we are going to continue to promote to our customer base because you just have to listen to the consumer. All right, the next page, and this one's super interesting, is the question was to the owners, do they really know what the surface material is in their vehicle? 36% of the owners did not. And that is an issue, and that's something that we continue to try to focus on in our communication campaign with consumers and our customers, that this confusion or unknown is one of the reasons that the OEMs have been able to substitute synthetic for leather in a much easier fashion. But here's a number that is really astonishing. The synthetic owners, albeit 226 in the survey, these individuals that have synthetic in their vehicle, 53% of them perceived the material as being leather. That is astounding. And that again just highlights the fact that there is such confusion out there, and to some degree a lot of deception in terms of when the consumer bought their vehicle, they really did not understand what the material was. So again, a stunning number and one that we're going to continue to promote. The next page from the study talked about the dealer experience. And basically it talked about that if the synthetic owner discovered that their material was not was not leather, it was synthetic, and you already saw the fact that there was such confusion of what it was, that basically the question was, would they accept that situation or not? So here are the responses. 4% said they were absolutely not accepted at all. 28% said they would not accept that situation. 44% said they would have to accept. They don't like it, but they would have to accept it. And then here, 15% would accept it, 9% didn't care. But this is still a significant situation of the consumers that said they would not be happy if in fact they found out that that material was not leather. And then a very important question then was, in your next vehicle purchase decision, what would you do in terms of going back to that brand where you did not get the proper description of the material? 9% said they would go to another brand. 65% said they would consider other brands. This is a major issue for the OEMs, and they can't afford to lose 1% of market share of people going to a different brand. So again, the disclosure has to be more pure, because there is definitely discontent, as you can see here, in that particular purchase retail event when they deal with the actual dealer itself at a retail site. They may get information, albeit not very clear, on the internet, on a brochure, from friends, but when they're at that point of actually purchasing the vehicle, that's where this discontent occurred once they found out that it was not leather. All right, so now I'm going to pivot over to GST for a second. For us, obviously, sustainability is a very, very big part of our vision, and you can see here that basically for us, we call it the FTH Circular Commitment, Farm to Hide. So we're looking at the entire supply chain, product chain, and putting focus with our abattoir supply partners on animal care, traceability, really trying to dig back and make sure we can get a better clarity on that for our customers. And then, of course, sustainability prevails throughout that entire chain. But internally, we're doing some tremendous work on advanced product developments now to make it much more clear with the help of our supply partners around the world, both on a hide standpoint and a chemical side, and certainly internally with our own conservation. So again, our FTH Circular Commitment. And then a little bit deeper here, and really no surprise, is basically if you split that product chain, the upfront side, we are definitely working with our abattoir partners on the carbon footprint, animal welfare, and traceability points to get better clarity and to improve the situation. And this is not unique to the automotive sector. We realize that it's happening across the board with all leather markets, but certainly we're seeing the need for it in automotive. We actually have got an LCA in process right now that we're very excited about, that will finish here in the first part of 2021 and move on to other regions for us to continue that. So again, it's a commitment we've made to this process. And then obviously when the product reaches our end of the business, which is the tanning, retanning, finishing, and cutting, we continue with a carbon footprint focus, but also a tremendous focus on our resource conservation, product, energy, water, waste. And we've got many programs that are in place to handle our current business, our current facilities, and as I mentioned to you, really working on some advanced products that are going to revolutionize the business from a product and sustainability standpoint. So very, very excited. Now, the next page, and this is one that I'm going to spend a little bit of time on because we're very passionate about it. It's an initiative that we have really started amongst our peers as well as the leather industry as a whole, and we focused with the associations around the world, including CICB. We have termed it Leather United because frankly, no news to anybody I think on this webinar, the leather share in the automotive industry has gone down significantly in the last 5 to 7 years in favor of synthetic alternatives. And frankly, we've got to address that. We've got to address it in a two-front scenario, and that's what we're going to focus on with this effort. So we have already had one phone call with several members, association members, and obviously we've got our circle here of groups that we feel are the ones that we're going to focus on. We're going to bring in some of our colleagues from our competitors as well, because basically we feel there has to be a need for the industry to garnish and come up with one plan, a very strong plan that we can take back in some sort of a very focused PR campaign to consumers as well as to our automotive customers. But primarily, we want to get a message out to the consumer base regarding leather. And what we've run up against here in the automotive world is that basically at the front end, and we all know what's happening with NGO feedback, is that the carbon footprint has become much more important in terms of their expectation. The CSR story, greenhouse gas, lately with the COVID situation, antimicrobial, deforestation, which again, certainly in South America and Brazil is a very strong issue. And then of course, animal welfare and traceability. And this is why we have to work closely now with our abattoir partners, with the beef industry, because it's such a big part of getting the proper story together. And again, I'll come down to the action plan in a second. But also we have the issue at the back end, and we've talked about it here on a few of the pages, and that is that the brand name and labeling strategy is something we have to address. There has to be some regulation done to deal with this because it is an issue for us, and I'll share that on my next slide. We believe strongly that there needs to be full disclosure of the surface material description. The consumer deserves to know that. When they are purchasing an article like a vehicle at that price level, they need to understand what material they're getting, especially if there's an aspiration, an expectation, or just an assumption that it is a leather product in their vehicle. Because basically over the last 20 years, up until say 2014-15, the consumer had two choices. It was fabric or leather, because there was no synthetic alternative that would meet the stringent automotive requirements. So basically, as that product line has improved over the years, here in the last 5 or 7 years, the fact that the OEMs have been able to substitute that material in the vehicle without properly disclosing it, most of the consumers don't understand that. We just, again, want to bring that to light and just basically make them aware, be transparent. Furthermore, we've got issues in our business at the retail level that I mentioned with the dealer sales personnel in terms of the accuracy of descriptions of the material. and frankly, just a lack of knowledge. Many of the sales folks just don't really understand the facts about the material that's in there, whether it's synthetic or leather. And that has led to the consumer confusion. You saw that on the previous pages. It prevailed in the US, just like I showed you with China, but it's real, and it's something we've got to try to at least bring to light with our customers, but most importantly to the consumers. And finally, I mentioned to you that we think that there's a profit opportunity that the OEMs are missing by at least not offering leather. Let the customer know, let them make the decision. It's not a plastic material, and it's really their choice. Just give them the knowledge of what that surface material is, and then they can make the choice, or at least have an option to possibly get leather instead of a synthetic or a fabric, which today is a very, very tough thing to do at the retail level. So what we're suggesting is we'd like to get the groups together and really kind of harness a strategy and an action plan that we're saying, first of all, educate the customer and the consumers with data on the front end expectations. We believe very strongly there needs to be a fact-based portfolio put together in these issues so everybody in the industry can have the same story for these issues. We believe a third party has got to conduct this, but something that the industry can use in a database that we all can rely on and tell a proper, educated story back to consumer and customers. Secondly, we are embarking on a clear comparison of performance traits versus synthetics. We think it's important that, again, there's nothing out there definitive from a third party. It needs to be part of this study that we're talking about here on the left. Finally, we must continue to promote the leather quality socially. Most of the associations and companies are doing a great job trying to get that done, but we have to go beyond that. But continue to promote the sustainability benefits, the beauty of leather, the real facts of leather, etc., need to continue. We also think there has to be some pressure on local governments regarding the regulations of leather labeling. South America has done a great job. Europe is getting much better. I think we all know Italy made a tremendous stride here in the summer. But in the US and China, there is really not much regulation regarding labeling in terms of the ability to use that word in the labeling of a product, and we think that has to take place. So we're going to promote that and see if we can't get some regional information and regional buy-in to that theory. Number 5 is the PR campaign, and this is where we think bringing the associations and resources together needs to happen and have a very, very strong campaign that we all agree to take out, again, primarily, we believe, to the consumers regarding awareness and transparency. And finally, let's take advantage strongly of the fact that our product is not plastic. We know what's happening in the world in terms of the attention that plastic is now getting, and the switching from plastic to other materials is important. It is a crisis, and we need to take advantage of that because, frankly, consumers, if they truly understand that these synthetic seats are made from petroleum, I think we'll have a shift. So again, it has to be part of this final campaign. So more on this. We're going to try to be part of this. We're going to try to push it to bring the experts together and then let this thing fly. Finally, and I've shown this in some other webinars as well, but I'll do it again. And again, I just say very simply, transparency. These are 7 brand names of materials that OEMs around the world are using for their synthetic material without any further description, either in the brochure, in a window sticker, online, nothing other than these names. And we strongly believe the consumer needs to understand that these brand names are not leather. And just frankly, give it the proper description. You'll let the consumer know what it is, and then they can make the decision. So we're going to continue on that campaign. It's something that has prevailed here in the last 4 to 5 years with the addition of new brand names being utilized here. And it just needs to be discussed and really brought to light. And then finally, I'm going to share with you, because we thought this was a pretty interesting way to kind of talk about the issue that I keep harping on here regarding labeling, it's a 1-minute video that we did socially. We posted it to all of our platforms about 3 weeks ago, and I want to play this for you and let you see it. And that will be the finale for my presentation. I thank you very much for joining, and I'll be certainly here for questions and answers. But again, let's choose leather. So here you go. So that concludes my presentation. And again, just let's let the consumers make the choice. So Rogério, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I'm going to stop sharing.
Excelente, Stephen. Obrigado. Obrigado por compartilhar conosco.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much for sharing such important data with us on an industry that truly supports the tanning industry. Year after year, we've seen the growth of the importance of this market in purchasing leather not only from Brazil, but from the world. Currently, 20% of the leather that is produced in the world goes into the auto industry. This goes to show how important this industry is. And right now, we're able to have access to modern options and trends for this kind of approach. Our second guest is Mr. Kim Sena. He's the sustainability manager of JBS Couros, and he works on ecological solutions or green solutions for the tanning industry, including optimization processes and the assessment of mechanisms to minimize the use of natural resources. He was also in charge of creating the Kind Leather platform and a platform for traceability for JBS 360. Good morning, Rogério. Thank you.
Suponho que vocês estão conseguindo ver minha apresentação.
Can you see my screen?
Bom, gente, primeiramente, bom dia para todos. É grande prazer estar aqui.
First of all, good morning. I'm very happy to be here, and I would like to thank the CICB and the NWF. This is a beautifully organized event, and I do hope to see more of it in the future. This is a very important topic for us to discuss in our industry and in the world. I would also like to thank Stephen for the great insights that he has brought to us during his presentation. I was interested in a lot of the information you shared, and I think we have to discuss a lot of it, and we need more transparency when it comes to the information that we relay onto customers in this industry. Today, I want to discuss two main topics. Number one, if we think about what Stephen said at the end of his presentation, we need to think about transparency and how it has an impact on leather and the material industry. Number two, we need to talk about the assessment of the life cycle of materials and how this has an impact in global chains. So let's start with transparency. When it comes to transparency, we need to think not only about traceability and about being able to take everything from endpoint to endpoint, but we also need to think about leaving behind of us a production chain, not only when it comes to leather, but when it comes to any kind of industry, where usually we had fortresses. Only people inside of it would have access to what happened there. And right now, we need different supply chains that are truly open and transparent.
O que é importante discutir aqui, importante ficar claro que a gente precisa avançar.
And we need to understand that we still need to make progress here. Let me give you an example of a report we saw recently. You may have seen it. This is a report released by the Earthsite organization. In this report, we saw complaints, we saw information about deforestation practices in the Chaco ecosystem. Of course, this is not the first time we hear about it, and it won't be the last one, but this is a very important report because of its subject matter. I do apologize, I'm experiencing some technical issues. There we go. Can you see my slide? Let me share my screen with you again.
Desculpa, retornei. Então, assim, ele foi focado na indústria automobilística, né? A gente está no mundo hoje que a gente tem informação satélite.
This focused on the auto industry, and right now we have satellite information free of charge available to everyone at all times. And this kind of approach becomes more and more common. We have institutions that are funded to have this kind of initiative. And we see in our society that it has become a trend to expose brands, because this is a way of putting pressure on them and making things happen and making change happen. But we think that this kind of report and this kind of expose is going to be more and more common. Of course, this applies to other brands and to other industries, but in the auto industry, for example, this leads brands to not only look for transactional relationships or sales relationships. And if you think about plastic, for example, we are talking about a synthetic material that is a commodity, basically. But when it comes to leather, we need trust relationships. Because of how leather is exposed to the topics of deforestation and animal welfare, we know that the relationships that we see in this industry need to be relationships based on trust, and they have to do with supply chains, and they have to do with safety. Car manufacturers need to know, either because they value it or because they are afraid of being exposed, they need to be sure that their partners and collaborators are offering transparency, and that they will be able to sleep at night, and that they won't be involved in any scandals the next day because of deforestation practices when obtaining leather. So let me share a little bit about our approach. At JBS Couros, since 2009, when big slaughterhouses established agreements, we had the Greenpeace involved, we had the Ministry of the Environment. Since then, we have been working on some practices, for example, of not purchasing these animals from deforested areas or from indigenous lands. And we already did that before, of course, but this has to do with transparency now, not only traceability. That is why JBS 360 came to be. Of course, we had auditing and we had control, but we made all of that public now. Now we have glass windows into our processes with JBS 360. And I don't know if this would be the right word, but we were extremely happy with the feedback we got from our customers. And this has opened many doors to us, because we got to a level of safety that is impossible to measure. Because customers now know that through stamps on the leather, and through auditing and through traceability, it is possible to trace this leather back to the group of farms that provided us with an animal. And we may be sure, we can be sure that this has nothing to do with deforestation. So this is something we have been doing, and we got very positive feedback from that because we truly opened our doors and we made our process more transparent. Now, in addition to that program, we have this program called Together for the Amazon. This is from this year. We want this to be the biggest initiative by a private company to preserve the Amazon region. We have 4 strategic pillars. We want to protect the forest, we want to restore it, we want to have social and economic development for the communities living there because they deserve it and they need social economic development in a sustainable way without harming this biome. And the 4th pillar is more technological and scientific development. We want people in the area to have their revenue and to have their livelihood without having to resort to deforestation. So this program goes through that. We won't have more time to go into detail about it, but all of this information is available online. But the most important thing here is the sustainability of the supply chain. This program brings about a few unique solutions on how to control the supply chain beyond direct suppliers. Because controlling people who are selling animals to slaughterhouses is something that JBS and other companies have already done for a long time, and they do it really well. But what is really hard in the national livestock system is to understand what is happening to this animal before the point of sale, before it was sold to a slaughterhouse. Because we have a number of farmers that play a role in the life of this animal. Also, deforestation is a problem in Brazil, as we all know. And we need to figure out how to control that. We need to control the exceptions and people who are performing deforestation but who do not fully represent our cattle raisers. Of course, most of them are sustainable, but some of them do engage in unlawful activities. So when we have transparency through every point in the supply chain, we can truly find those who are wrongdoers and those who are complying with the laws. So JBS, through the green platform that it has created with the Together for the Amazon program, wants to, until 2025, be able to control the suppliers of our suppliers. They will all register in a blockchain platform, and we won't be able to see their suppliers, but we'll have an automatic validation system according to every rule that we already apply to our direct suppliers. That includes, for example, satellite controlling to make sure that we don't have deforestation practices here. We also have other rules by the Brazilian Institute of the Environment and Renewable Natural Resources. And we want to make sure that these unlawful suppliers are not a part of our supply chain. This also ensures the protection of the Amazon biome, which is rich and diverse. We are really proud of this program. And we truly think that this is going to change how cattle raising works in Brazil.
Só para fechar aqui, gente, esse tema de rastreabilidade, vocês veem, né? Ele está avançando muito rapidamente. Ele é um tema
You
quente.
see, traceability is making great strides recently. And everything has to do with transparency because traceability alone is not enough if your client does not feel safe. So this is the message I wanted to share with you when it comes to that. So let's move on to the second topic. Let's talk about the assessment of a material life cycle. Now, a big question we have right now, in addition to cost and margin and revenue, is the kind of environmental impact that is caused by the components that we have in our cars. And of course, customers want more sustainable cars. Stephen has brought us very interesting figures on that. We are more and more sure of that by the day. And we clearly see that by the ascension of electric vehicles. But doing that is not easy. I know this is a kind of complex, confusing slide, but that's the case because this chain is confusing. What we were trying to do in this study was to work on raw material extraction, material processing, manufacturing, delivery, customer use, and the end of their life cycle. And they were trying in this study to map out everything that happens in the auto industry to have coherent metrics on the impact that is caused by a car. Because whenever we have a single point assessment, we also have a very shallow evaluation. And usually that's the kind of assessment we see in this industry, right? We have very general analysis of the impact of electrical components, for example. And we say that this is more sustainable. And well, yes, certainly this is going to be more sustainable than ICE engines. But if we're not careful with how we design vehicles, we're not going to comply with the requirement of sustainability overall. That's why we need to take everything into account. And everything is born in design, because we have design and then manufacturing and then the use of this product. And this encompasses around 25 years in a developed country and up to 40 years in a developing country. So these cars are going to be on the roads for a long time. And we know the kind of impact we have. The auto industry has an impact on sustainability and on this search for a more sustainable planet. That is why we need to take all of this into account during the design stage. After the car is ready, there isn't much we can do. So how can I be more sustainable in design, in manufacturing, in recycling, in the use of materials, in durability, in energy efficiency, and in the end of the life cycle? And if I were to bring you a piece of criticism about leather, I would say that sometimes for energy efficiency, we have lighter materials, but when it comes to durability, it is clear that leather is a great material. And it is important for us to understand all of that, ask questions, look for weaknesses, and work on improving them. It is also obviously important to explore our strengths. And to do that, we use the life cycle assessment, also known as the LCA. That's the acronym in English. So with the life cycle assessment, we have an example here. Here we have the carbon footprint for lactic acid in the production chain. And of course, we have other parameters. We have water consumption, we have eutrophication, we have the increase of organic material in a water stream, because oftentimes we do that and oxygen goes down and everything dies. That's why we have different parameters, not only with the potential for global warming, even though this is the most famous one. So let me give you an example. With this kind of LCA, we assess the whole supply chain. So in the case of lactic acid in Thailand, for example, we see the point of farming for sugarcane. Then we see the amount of fuel we used to harvest it, to process it, the CO2 that was generated in the plants, etc. This is a very tough very complex assessment, but it is the only kind of assessment that can truly translate the sustainability of a material, because this is a holistic approach. It is truly taking everything into consideration. Here we have another example of an LCA for a Volvo truck. Of course, there are other manufacturers, but in this case, they created EPDs. These EPDs are the rules for assessing the environmental impact of a product. In this case, we are assessing a truck. They said that 12% of impact comes from materials and production. 58% of the impact of this product throughout their life cycle comes from fuel. 30% comes from exhaust emissions, and 5% comes from maintenance. So even though this is a real number for a diesel truck, these numbers change a lot for electric cars. And we are talking about the near future here. So we know that the impact of fuel will go down, but the impact of materials will go up. So we're going to shift focus to materials in LCAs because it is becoming more and more relevant. And this does not happen only in the automotive industry. We saw that recently the leather industry got together to write a letter, and CICB was a part of it, along with other important organizations from leather from all over the world. So we have the Higg index score, and the number for leather in the Higg index score did not truly reflect its environmental impact in the world. Some of these numbers would take a very long life for animals, 5 years, and we know that's not the case. Whenever we have farm animals for leather, that's not the case. It also didn't take into account the lifetime of this material. And what we wrote in the letter is that it is as if they were saying that a plastic fork will be more sustainable than a metal fork. And this letter has had some ripples in the industry. It has even had an impact on influencing designers and decision makers. Sometimes these considerations have to do with the clothing industry, but we also know that the auto industry is taking this kind of idea into account. We get questions from auto industry customers asking us about our LCV. And as I said, the LCV takes a lot of things into account. The lifetime of an animal is going to be distributed also to many industries and products, for example, meat, which is obvious, but also leather and also car interiors. And car interiors will have their share of environmental impact because of that. But how can you assign this responsibility? You can do it economically, you can do it according to their value. But in those standard charts, usually 3.5 to 5% of an animal's value was assigned to leather. But that's no longer true. The prices of leather went down, so it doesn't account to 3.5 to 5% of the value of an animal. It is much less than that now. That is why, as an industry, we need to explore more options, we need to generate more information, and we need to start a conversation that is based on science. It is not about politics, it is not about lobbying. No war will be won in sustainability because of that. It is about science. We need to assess the life cycle. And it is very important for us to try and measure the right allocation of everything that is in a bowl,
para o couro, porque o impacto é absurdo. Assim,
because we have a lot of impact here.
em carbono, mas a da
The
pecuária
leather chain is not very carbon intensive, but the livestock chain is.
para o potencial de aquecimento global, ela representa 80%
If we think about the potential of global warming, that represents 80%.
pecuária, né? Então, ela é
Livestock represents 80% of that potential.
detalhe que a gente consiga ter, maior transparência, maior
So
exatidão,
if we have more information, more accuracy, and more transparency, I am sure that our perception about this material will change in society.
a gente está fazendo uma avaliação de ciclo de vida do caim de leather, né?
We have a life cycle assessment
Sustentável,
according to the kind letter parameters.
assim, diferenças claras nesse
This is a sustainable platform,
couro convencional. Pra gente
but we are
entender
also
melhor,
thinking
a
about
gente tá fazendo
traditional leather.
consultoria na Itália chamada Spin 360.
We have a consultancy in Italy called Spin 360.
Como eu vinha comentando, não só
We're able to measure environmental impact not only in our potential for global growth or for water consumption, for example, but in other areas as well.
de combustíveis fósseis,
For example, abiotic depletion, or how much fossil fuel will be consumed in this chain, or human toxicity.
todas elas
These are just some of the metrics that we can use.
na ISO 14040,
And all of them
metodologias
are
utilizadas.
based on ISO standards.
É isso que é importante.
We need
Possibilitar que a gente
norms and we need comparable parameters. That's extremely important.
chamando ele de vegano,
We can't just create a synthetic material and call it vegan because it doesn't include an animal.
o fato de não ser de origem animal quisesse dizer que ele é mais sustentável. Que a gente
And we can't try and force this idea that if something doesn't come from an animal, it is going to be more sustainable necessarily, because that is not the case.
a gente fez esse estudo esse ano, o primeiro estudo
This is not a scientific approach.
a gente pegou algo que foi bem particular, que
We performed a study this year.
frigorífico e fazenda, naturalmente,
We used data from slaughterhouses and farms, and since we are a verticalized company, we were able to take into account the allocation information that I was talking about in a more precise way.
a pele representava do boi,
We were able to truly see how much leather accounted for in a bowl,
vocês terem ideia,
information about farms, information about slaughterhouses, and we had over 10,000 data points.
a gente, os limites do sistema aqui do que é chamado de do berço ao portão, né, que é
And we created this system that we called from birth to gate. So we are talking about the farm all the way to when finished leather leaves a facility. We are now going into the auto industry, the furniture industry, and we have started more research, which will probably be ready by the first quarter of next year, maybe the beginning of the second quarter. Because we want to make this really clear for kind leather and for traditional leather, and we want to clearly see the differences. Let me share some figures with you. For a customer of ours in athletic footwear, we visited their plant, and they have this philosophy of sustainability. They truly want to reduce their environmental impact throughout the chain. Because think about it, it is useless for us to do that individually in a tannery. We need to work on the whole chain. And for this client, we were comparing the leather that they used before, which was a wet blue. It was not a kind leather. They didn't have optimized formulations. They didn't have water reduction. And then we compared it to a kind leather with segmentation and stripes and with optimized use of resources. We also made sure that we only added to the drums everything that was necessary, and so on. And these were some of the indicators we assessed. For example, here we have thermal energy consumed. And here we are comparing the new leather with the kind leather methodology to the old methodology they used to use. So we are seeing the difference of the impact they generated. And as you can see, these are significant numbers. And when it comes to environmental impact, once again, we have mathematical models.
O aquecimento global expressa em quilogramas de CO2
we have.
Da abordagem que a gente está tomando, assim, esse é o nosso plano. É seguir sempre uma abordagem científica para a mensuração de impactos ambientais, mas isso expressa, assim, a demanda da indústria, né? Diversos clientes.
And this has to do with a new demand in this industry. I'm sure the same thing is happening to you. Clients are now knocking at our doors, asking for this kind of information. And they truly want to measure the environmental impact for this chain. This is what I wanted to share with you. These are the two biggest topics we have as far as sustainability goes in our company. The others are also important, for example, animal welfare. But I do hope to have been able to share interesting information with you on how we approach this, how we try to fight for leather, and how we try to use science to do that. We truly want to use science to bring about more transparency and more clarity on the impact of leather. There's a lot of prejudice, and people generalize ideas. And it's easy for ignorant people to say, well, this is vegan, so it's more sustainable. But we want to have a scientific conversation. We want to use the same parameters for every option. Just as Stephen said at the end of his presentation, we need to provide consumers with clear information, and we also need to have fair comparisons. That's what I wanted to share with you. Once again, thank you very much to the CICB and NWF. Thank you very much, Kim. This is a lot of important information. JBS Couros is one of our biggest collaborators at CICB and the leather industry, and you always have a lot of innovation, and you show respect for professionals, companies, and society as a whole. I'm very happy to have seen your news and your ideas at JBS Couros. So now we have an opportunity to ask questions to our speakers. We are waiting for a few questions, but I have a question for Stephen right now. Stephen, the perception of our end clients in the auto industry has always been important, but more than ever, this has become a mandatory consideration when choosing materials and components, including for cars. In your presentation, we saw some information about that. Could you please talk a little bit more about that? And could you please tell us what GST thinks about this situation, especially in the current scenario? Because we are going through a pandemic. So what kind of expectation do consumers have right now when it comes to the pandemic? You can share information about the materials included in a car. For example, traceability, environmental impact, deforestation, carbon footprint, transparency, and animal welfare. So please talk a little bit about those concepts.
We do not really see any significant impact change post COVID or pandemic scenario as relates to synthetic versus leather. This has been, as I mentioned, been going on for a few years now in terms of the shift from leather to synthetics, and as I said in my presentation, the biggest issue here is the description, confirmation, and frankly, I think the material, those particular materials, the companies that are producing synthetics and fabrics have done a wonderful job from an innovation standpoint. They all have tremendous qualities, but they're not leather. And so from a labeling standpoint, none of these should have a leather tag at the end or front. And secondly, again, just describe exactly what they are and let the consumer make the decision. We know how strong of a following we have with natural leather, that people, again, from even the latest research here that was done this summer, do in terms of their preference is significant. So again, it really is a campaign of ours is to just be open, let the consumer understand what the material is, and let them make the decision. We will continue to deal with, as I said in my presentation, the pressure, which is not just in the automotive world, it's in the entire world, certainly with us from a leather standpoint and other industries, to address the issue of animal welfare and traceability, even though we all know it's primarily really from the abattoir and back to the ranch, but it's part of our chain. So we're going to have to be part of that improvement, and that's why we're definitely promoting that we get a story for each one of these areas, so that consistently as an industry we can communicate that back to our customers, again, regardless of what industry, and ultimately to the consumer.
Okay. Ok, thank you, Steve. Temos uma pergunta também para o Kim Sena. Então,
We have a question to Kim Sena. How can the company improve the perception of leather with car buyers? Thank you for your question. I share Stephen's point of view. The company does. We must have clear information to users, data-based, using surveys, just like the one Stephen shared with us. And again, I'll be harping on this argument, but we have to give them that security that the leather industry has nothing to hide. We are sustainable in essence. We're using a raw material to provide such a noble product. We want to give them comfort and security, that leather is the way to go. Plastic is a great material, but for some specific things. You cannot make a computer out of leather or a glass, but for upholstery, that's just perfect. It will last for many, many years. So we have to give them data, numbers, being very transparent, how sustainable leather is. Thank you, Kim. That's a question to Stephen now. How can the auto industry believe that leather is actually valuable? Because sustainability is very important, and they have to deal with the fact that it puts pressure on the final cost.
Yes, it was. Generally, I think I get it. Well, that's why, again, similar to what Kim said, and I mentioned in my presentation, we really need to get a concentrated reply to these various sustainable points that have come up here with our customers, so that we're very unified in our response to this as it relates to leather. We have, as Kim said, we have a response, a very, very sustainable product, and that's what we continue to talk about in comparison to the alternative, which is frankly plastic, and that's primarily PVC or PU. So we need to stay strong on that and promote the qualities of leather from a sustainability standpoint, and the fact that if you look at the automotive, in our case, the automotive companies around the world, very, very substantial efforts in meeting those needs and expectations. So again, regarding the fact that the consumers, as we've seen with research, do aspire to have leather in certain segments of the vehicle, and as I've said on this presentation and many times before, there are three options out there today, and we don't see any change in the foreseeable future. There's going to be leather, there's going to be synthetic, and there's going to be fabrics. They all have their qualities. Let's define what those are, be very transparent to the customers, and let them make the decision. And for us, we will continue to promote the qualities of leather so that we make sure that the customer and the consumer understand the sustainability attributes as well as just the pure product attributes. We've got such a unique product. Every hide, every product made, it's really a personalized story, one by one. Every hide's different, every hide's unique, and we can really promote that, I think, as being very positive for our industry.
Ok, Stephen, obrigado. Vou fazer uma última pergunta.
Thank you, Stephen. This is our final question to Kim. It's about the leather law. How can that law or that act can help promote leather vis-a-vis synthetic products?
Aqui eu vou dar uma opinião, assim, o meu ponto de vista, assim, eu acredito que a lei do couro,
Here's my take.
ela é muito importante por uma questão de
This regulation is very important to provide customers with clarity, transparency. They must be sure that whatever they're buying and it's labeled leather, it is in fact leather. It's a matter of being honest. On the other hand, leather instills envy on others. It's just like a razor blade. Razor blades are there. Gillette, the brand, is copied and they like it. And they're copied for a reason. It's good. It's a good material. And we have to be careful because this is an important approach. We must stand behind that transparency of our product. But on the other hand, it shouldn't be reactive only. We shouldn't be on the defense all the time. That's it, and end of story. We have to promote that attribute and also other positive qualities. It's being copied for a reason. Keep on copying. You will never be able to match it. You'll never be leather. Plastic will never be leather. That's our challenge. How to adopt that approach to use the regulation per se, so that it's a synonym of transparency. Consumers, be aware of what you're buying. At the same time, we have to be subjective on one hand, and we have to be objective when we talk about the sustainability attributes of leather. Perfect. Consumers are always right. Folks, I would like to thank the speakers, Stephen and Kim. This is the end of the Brazilian Leather webinar series. It was a fantastic project. We conducted this effort with the support of NWF, National Wildlife Federation. I would like to thank NWF from the bottom of our hearts for the partnership. We have shared important information that will support us to pick more sustainable options, looking at the environment, people, and the economy. I would like to thank Simon Hall, Mauricio Bauer, Rafael Andrade, and the entire NWF team. Thank you for attending. A recording of this webinar will be available at the Brazilian Leather webinar series in our website. We'll be soon announcing yet a major event, bringing together knowledge, innovation, and positive examples. That is going to be the CICB Forum, a sustainability forum that will be held in early December. See you then. Thank you.